Hello, my friends. This is Lindy. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. I am going to do a tag today. I was tagged by Roz of Scallydandling about the books, and I haven't done a tag in ages. And this Western Canon books tag just really appealed to me because it just got me thinking about what has shaped me as a reader. The parameters of this tag, I believe it was Aaron Facer who created it. I will include a link down below, and basically it's to talk about 20 books that are maybe the most important to you as a reader. I can't even remember exactly what the question is, but I'm going off on a bit of a tangent. Because when I started thinking, the most influence on me as a reader, I think, are the Lang fairy tale books. My grandmother had a boarding house, and one of the beds in the attic was supported by a whole bunch of hardcover books where the leg was broken, and I would get one of my uncles to help me get a book out at a time, and I just pored over those. I just loved them so much. They had color plate illustrations, and they were stories like Thumbelina and East of the Sun, West of the Moon, and Charles Kingsley's Water Babies was in there, or maybe that was a separate book. I can't remember exactly, but the fairy tales just filled my head. I loved the Grimm's fairy tales, the Charles Perrault tales, Little Red Riding Hood, and Hansel and Gretel, Jack and the Beanstalk, Little Mermaid, Cinderella, and I'm not talking the Disney versions. With Cinderella, it was her stepsisters cutting off their toes and blood oozing out of the slippers to make it fit, and Little Mermaid was like walking on knives with every step. You know, all of the horrors of that. Mother Goose definitely was an influence, well, connected with Charles Perrault, I guess. I went to a French language school because my mother's first language was French. Some of you may not know that in Canada there are French-speaking communities outside of Quebec, and I grew up in one of those in Alberta, northeastern Alberta. And so, French school, so it was French literature that we studied in, and the Fables de La Fontaine, the fables of Jean La Fontaine, made a big impression on me, and a lot of those are based on Aesop's fables and some other older tales, things like the ant and the grasshopper. There's magic fish. There's the farmer with the three sons, the cat who turns into a woman. You know, those kinds of stories. It just fired my imagination. Yeah. We also had a collection of books at home that were the Uncle Remus Brer Rabbit stories. So these were stories based on African tales that were brought by people who were enslaved in the American South. And I think the editions that we had might have been based on Joel Chandler Harris's collections of those that were from the 1880s. In elementary school, I think the story that stuck with me the most is one by Alphonse Daudet, La Chèvre de Monsieur Seguin. And I was even just thinking about it this week because I'm reading Cora Sandel's Alberta and Freedom, and that message in Daudet's story about the goat who wants freedom and ends up getting eaten by a wolf it resonates in Alberta's story, in Alberta and freedom, that I was with the goat wanting the freedom no matter the cost, and I'm with Alberta in this novel about her not wanting to get tied down by a husband or any romantic relationship. She wants her freedom, even if it means she's going to be poor. Yeah. Other classics that really stuck with me that I read when I was still a kid are Alice in Wonderland and Anne of Green Gables and Tom Sawyer. I read The Sword in the Stone by T.H. White when I was a kid, and that since I'm including that here as part of the canon because I think it came out in the 1930s, but it's based on older stories. And since then, I've always been interested in the Arthurian tales and interpretations of them. Then when I got into my teens, that's when I read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Of the Shakespeare that I studied when I was in high school, my favorite was Hamlet, and it's still my favorite of all the Shakespeare plays. I read The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Coleridge and became fascinated with long tales told in verse. And you'll see that that continues as I got older. I read a lot of Greek, Roman, and Norse mythology when I was a teen. And in my French literature studies, Le Malade Imaginaire by Molière, that's probably the one that stuck with me the most. Then when I got into my 20s and 30s, I read Willa Cather for the first time, Death Comes for the Archbishop. I read all the Agatha Christie's, and I went through all the John Steinbeck novels. I read Rebecca, Daphne du Maurier. I read lots of Oscar Wilde. I remember Nightwood by Juna Barnes, which came out in 1936. I read it twice in a row, and it made a deep impression on me. So of the modernist literature, I would say that's the one that really sticks out. I also started reading interpretations of Gilgamesh, whatever I could find about Gilgamesh, the ancient Sumerian epic. It's like 4,000 years old. And Beowulf, another epic written in verse. I remember picking up Evgeny Onegin, Eugene Onegin, however you say it, Pushkin's story in verse. That was originally published in the early 1800s. So yeah, stories in verse. I still love them. When I was in my 40s, I read The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. In some English translation, I don't even know who was the translator. And it was also when I was in my 40s that I started reading all kinds of adaptations and interpretations of ancient Indian literature, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, both outside of the Western canon, but these are books that continue to have an attraction for me, and I'm always excited when I see new interpretations of them or retellings. And then when I was in my 50s, I finally read the complete Odyssey, the Emily Wilson translation. I'd read lots of sort of shorter adaptations, but I read the Odyssey straight through and loved it. I also read Don Quixote by Cervantes. I felt like finally I'm getting to this. And that's another one that has so many connections to other books, including ones that I'd read earlier, like Tristram Shandy. And let's just wait for that helicopter to finish passing overhead. A lot of times when I'm going to be going to see a play, like a Shakespeare play, I'll read it first. And it happened when I was in my 50s that I went to see the Lysistrata. And so I not only read the Aristophanes play, but I got out a whole book on essays about Lysistrata. You know, when my imagination is captured by something, I just like to dive right in. And the reason I picked up Sophocles' play Antigone is because of Camilla Shamsie's novel Home Fires. So I was familiar with the story already. I can't even remember why, but I know that I specifically read through the play because of a novel. And the last book I'm going to mention is also outside of the Western canon, but it's been really, it really made an impression on me and on my reading since then, and that is The Tale of Genji from 11th century Japan. I read it a chapter a day for 54 days to get through it, and I alternated between a couple of different translations. I had the Arthur Waley translation and Royal Tyler translation, and it depended whether I had access to the paper book or if I was out and about I had the ebook downloaded, and so that's why I had the two different translations, and sometimes I would compare them back and forth as well. And every Japanese book that I've read since then, I feel like I'm getting more out of it just from having read The Tale of Genji. So I didn't actually count how many books I have here, but something like roughly 20 or so, I guess. You all are invited to do this tag as well, or tell me in the comments down below if any of the books that I've mentioned are also important to you in your formative years as a reader. Or I guess we're continually formed by what we read, isn't that right? So it's all ongoing. Thanks so much for watching.